This week we will discuss Rome, the Republic and Empire. While the influence of the ancient Near East and Greece are still evident, Rome is everywhere. Aspects of the story of Rome have been extensively taken up by modern empires and republics. French revolutionaries imagined themselves pledging their lives to the state, like the Horatii of Rome. Napoleon enacted the rituals of a Roman triumph when celebrating his victories. At the establishment of the American Republic, the story of the Roman Republic was both an exemplar, think of the comparison of Cincinnatus with George Washington, and a cautionary tale. The reasons for the failure of the Republic were debated in newspapers and pamphlets, including the Federalist Papers. Symbols drawn from the Roman Republic are on government seals and buildings throughout Washington. For example, the fasces, those bundles of rod often surrounding an axe. These were the symbols of authority given by people to the annually elected chief magistrates of Rome. Yes, the rods were for scourging wrongdoers, and the axe, you get the idea. And yes, the fasces are the basis of the word fascist. Mussolini and the Nazis also drew upon the story of Rome. More than all of this, you have probably seen or read bits of the story of Rome during the past few years. In Star Wars, the conflict between Republic and Empire. In Star Trek, the Romulans of Romulus. In the Hunger Games, the nation of Panem is clearly a reference to the expression panem et circenses, bread and circuses. This is by the writer Juvenal referring to the corruption of the people of Rome, who willingly gave up their political rights in return for bread and circuses. In Harry Potter, well, there are more references than there's time for in Harry Potter, and I'll leave a bit of the fun for you. Rome is a big topic, too big to cover in a short video, so we will focus on two things. First, our usual attempt to diagram the history of Rome. Second, as we did with the Greeks and the concept of agon, I will discuss one of the ideas that made the Romans tick, mos maiorum. The traditional date for the foundation of Rome is the year 753 BCE. We have few reliable sources for early Rome, but we do have many fables of the cruelty of the 7 kings who ruled until the establishment of a republic, traditionally in the year 509 BCE. The republic was, in many ways, like the polis in Greece. It was organized to prevent the accumulation of power into the hands of a would-be king or a narrow faction. As in the polis, this was accomplished by a combination of collegiality and annual elections. Each of the classes of magistrates, that is, the government officials, was paired with at least one other peer. Rome was never Athens, though. There was no rotation by lot or reorganization of the community to dissipate the power of the mighty. As one scholar has summed it up, it was a sophisticated system that acknowledged the right of all citizens to have a say in government, while in practice keeping control in the hands of the nobility. Now, this system worked for the most part of nearly 500 years. The history of the Republic might also be subdivided into 2 periods. During more or less the first 2.5 centuries, Rome was gaining mastery of the Italian peninsula, in part through its novel practice of incorporating adjoining Latin communities as allies rather than simply demanding tribute from them, and also fighting for control of the Western Mediterranean against its nemesis, Carthage. During the second half of its existence, the Republic gained an empire and, according to some, lost its soul. The wealth and responsibilities of territories acquired from Hellenistic kingdoms, as well as Spain and Gaul and later Egypt, upset the careful balance of the constitution. By 27 BCE, the Republic was, despite the claims of Augustus otherwise, done and dusted. The new empire of Rome can be divided into 3 periods. For nearly 2 centuries, Augustus's plan of regular provincial government and tight control of the army by the emperor worked. From Augustus until the death of the emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, there was a Pax Romana, or Roman peace. The empire flourished. However, over time, every death of an emperor was a crisis. During the 3rd century of the Common Era, the crises of succession and empire became critical, and the empire seemed on the edge of collapse. Assassination and civil war were commonplace. However, in 293 of the Common Era, the Emperor Diocletian restored a bit of imperial stability by dividing the empire in half and creating junior emperors for each half. This is the so-called Tetrarchy, the rule by four. In the West, this system began to fail in the 5th century of the Common Era, and the traditional date for the end of the Roman Empire in the West is 476 CE. We'll talk about that some more in the next chapter. In the East, however, Roman Constantinople survived for another millennium, but that is another story for the next chapter. One of the most important aspects of Roman society throughout the history of both the Republic and the Empire was the concept of mos maiorum, or the custom of the ancestors. Just as they quite literally revered their ancestors, Romans clung tightly to precedent and custom. The legitimacy of every act depended upon its being true to mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors. Indeed, when significant reforms or changes occurred, the Romans claimed that in reality they were simply restoring customs of the ancestors. To rule, you need to be old school. Customary practices were reinvented or adapted in order to maintain the appearance of adhering to precedent. An examination of a couple of the ceremonies concerned with that most Roman of Roman activities, war, well, illustrate the point. It has been estimated that during the period between 327 BCE and 100 BCE, there were only 13 years when Rome was not at war. Furthermore, during the 2nd century BCE, it has been estimated that Rome enlisted 13% of its total population, excluding Latin allies, and 60% of all 17-year-old males in its legions. Therefore, it is not surprising that in Rome there were a considerable number of rituals surrounding war. For your reading this week, you consider Livy's account of the Roman rituals for declaring war. In particular, I want to discuss the so-called spear rite. For the Romans, it was essential to assure the gods that Rome had right on its side when it went to war. In order to do this, a priest called a fetial, the herald in the document that you read, was sent to ritually demand redress of Rome's grievances. The same priest also slew a pig when a treaty was signed, praying that Rome might suffer the same fate as the pig if it failed to keep its word. If the priest's demands were not met, the priest would declare that Rome's hands were clean and she could go to war, the gods would approve. He would then return to Rome and inform the Senate. If the Senate then decided to go to war, a fetial would then return to the border of the enemy and throw in a spear to initiate the war. Now, we are not sure that Livy is correct about the origins of this ritual or whether it was always observed. However, we do know that this ritual was later enacted with some curious adaptations. You can imagine that when Rome was at war with its Latin neighbors, the ritual was easy enough. The fetial could make his way across Italy to ensure that Rome was on the right side and therefore liable to be rewarded with victory by Jupiter. But what about when Rome had acquired an empire and was liable to be fighting a war far away across the Mediterranean? We might think that they would just drop the whole business, and they might have. But when Octavian, soon to be Augustus, declared war on Cleopatra in 32 BCE, he threw a spear. No, he didn't toss it in the Nile. Instead, a piece of ground in front of the Temple of Bellona in Rome, the Temple of Bellona being the goddess of war, was declared to be foreign territory. Octavian, as the chief priest, fulfilled the demands of mos maiorum by tossing the blood-stained spear over the column of Bellona into a bit of foreign soil conveniently at hand. Octavian may have been particularly determined to demonstrate that mos maiorum had been followed because, along with Cleopatra, he was also engaged in a civil war with her Roman lover, Mark Antony. In a war between Romans, you want to at least appear old school.